All right, family covenant for the modern age. What is a covenant? Christian couples love talking about their marriage as a covenant. But if you ask them what that actually means, they would probably struggle to give an answer. They might eke out a vague response like, we have to be faithful to each other until death. Okay, but what does that mean? They might answer, well, we can't cheat on each other. Wow. So you can both do whatever you want in life except cheat on each other? What a simple covenant. The truth is, covenants are simple, but for a covenant to be fulfilled, it must be unpacked. That's why the Bible is such a big book. When you read the Bible, you see that God's desire is actually very simple. He wants to live with us and enjoy a loving relationship with us forever. That's what the entire Bible is about. God's relationship with humanity. Christians often call the Old and New Testaments covenants because that's how God enters into relationship with his people. He's not interested in having us as acquaintances. Acquaintances don't make covenants. Covenants are a bond, a promise, a guarantee that the maker of the covenant commits to. Covenants always require two parties, but just because one party makes a covenant doesn't mean the other party is bound by that covenant. That's why husbands and wives each make vows at their wedding. If the groom were to vow to take his bride as his wife, but then she got cold feet and ran out of the church, she would be making it impossible for him to fulfill his vow. He would not be bound to his vow because it was predicated upon her presence at the altar. Since she rejected his vow, he is free to either go find another woman or wait for a while and see if she changes her mind and comes back to the altar. Astonishingly, though, God's covenant to Abraham was completely one-sided, and so was his covenant to David. Abraham was sleeping, and David was sitting in his palace. They weren't the ones who initiated the covenant, but they welcomed it because they wanted to be with God. We can see this in the way Abraham humbly interacted with God and how David wanted to build God a house. They desired God, and God showed up in covenant. God made the covenant, and they simply received it. It's the same with us and God today. If we want him, he'll show up in covenant, and we'll be at the altar with an eager heart to receive it. The thief on the cross was saved simply through his desire for Jesus and his presence at the altar. The other thief despised the altar and the food on it. Just like Judas drank the blood of the covenant and then left Jesus, we too will receive no salvation if we do not remain at the altar. That's why Jesus said, "Remain in me." Remaining means waiting for him and structuring our lives to anticipate his arrival. When Jesus came 2,000 years ago, he revealed himself to everyone who was waiting for him: Simeon, Anna, Joseph of Arimathea, etc. As we wait for Jesus today, we can be sure that he will reveal himself to us too. One of the most beautiful passages in the Bible is Isaiah 25. It will be said on that day, "Surely this is our God. We have waited for him, and he has saved us. This is the Lord for whom we have waited. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation." Is waiting all a person needs to do to enter into covenant with God? Yes, because he himself will lead us to the covenant table if we are waiting with hearts full of joy, expectation, belief, and love for him. The reason God leaves the other side of the covenant open is because he wants us to write it ourselves. A covenant can only be meaningful if both parties truly believe in it from the heart. At the end of the day, a covenant is simply this: I want to be with you forever, and I will do whatever it takes to make that happen. A person might ask, if God's covenant is so simple, then why are there so many rules in the Old Testament? Well, that's where the unpacking comes in. Any married couple can attest to this. Just because the covenant is simple doesn't mean the story will be simple. From day one, married couples struggle to figure out how to actually live out the covenant. Their struggles will involve things like money, schedules, diet, etc. If the husband spends too much time at work, the wife might interpret that as not being faithful to the covenant. If she gets fat after marriage, he might interpret that as not being faithful to the covenant. The reality is that marriage is like a suitcase that gets packed and unpacked over and over again throughout the journey. It might get lost for a while in a busy airport or burst its seams if you put too much pressure on it. But it's your suitcase together, and you each know how to identify it and what it contains inside. You'll take turns guarding it while the other person is in the bathroom, and take turns sitting on it while you're waiting for the next flight. When it comes to the Bible, we shouldn't expect the covenant story to be much different than a married couple taking a long trip. The covenant will get tested constantly. Why did you take so long in the toilet? Why were you flirting with the flight attendant? At times, each person will interpret the other person's actions as a violation of the covenant. And when one person gets crabby, the other person needs to figure out what happened. In the Bible, people didn't try to figure out why God was crabby. Even today, when people read the Bible, they still don't try to figure it out. As soon as they get to the lists of rules, they stop reading completely. They plant their bookmark in Exodus chapter 20 and spend the rest of their life believing that God is a crabby character. The reason they didn't understand the rules is because they didn't understand the story. They completely missed the sequence of events. They missed the cheating. They missed the grumbling. They missed the rescue that was quickly forgotten about. If we want to understand God's character, we need to pay careful attention to the sequence of events that preceded his crabbiness. When God saved his people from slavery in Egypt, he wanted to tabernacle with them in the desert and lead them into the promised land. He performed wondrous signs among them and brought terrifying judgments against their captors. He led them safely through the Red Sea and struck down all their pursuers. But immediately after he saved them, they wanted to go back into slavery because they thought they were going to die in the desert. They despised the promise of God through their faithlessness and provoked him to wrath through their unfaithfulness. That's when the rules came. Just like a loving father needs to create rules for his rebellious children, God also boxes us in with rules until we mature. Paul describes it this way in Galatians. The law has become our trainer unto Christ so that we might be justified by faith. The King James Version puts it even more bluntly. Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. Children need a schoolmaster. Adults don't need one. The faster a child becomes an adult, the less painful things will be for him. Psalm 18 says, "To the pure you show yourself pure, but to the devious you make yourself seem torturous." If a child is constantly trying to escape from his father, the father will seem torturous to him. He needs to accept the fact that his father loves him and owns him and will never let him go. He needs to understand that being yoked to his father is a blessing, not a curse. It will seem like a curse if he's stiff-necked and rebellious. But if he's a good son, there will be no need for rules. This is why Jesus said that the law and the prophets hang entirely on these two commands: love God and love your neighbor. Paul said almost the same thing. The entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. The only kind of relationship God wants with his people is a covenant relationship. This means that the relationship is personal, not professional. There's no such thing as an impersonal covenant. God wants a relationship with us in person forever. The reason the relationship has suffered so badly throughout history is because we have repeatedly tried to get away from him. We need to stop trying to leave the relationship and embrace our lover instead. That's what covenant is.